I've been working with Jim Anderson on the FAA safety team for almost, 15 or more years. Jim and I got involved with this when Howard Devers down in Tucson was doing the CFI forums, and he was coming up to Phoenix to do them, and they were a little bit too much. So we were asked by Dominic Gallo to pick up the slack, and I've been involved with the FAST team ever since. And it's been quite rewarding to get to do these presentations all over the state on safety. Also president of the Arizona Aviation Safety Advisory Group. We meet the third Wednesday of the month. It's been on virtual on Zoom. Hopefully we'll get back to having the meetings at the FSDO. And we have lots of volunteers and assistants working with ASAG. Lee Unger is one of them. She's on with Brian Stamper. And I see Paul Rowley on as well. So lots of volunteers and lots of FAST team lead representatives. We have over 100 lead representatives in the state, or representatives, FAST team members in the state of Arizona. So it makes it a very active group handling all the portions of the state. One of the things that we've been interested in on ASAG is looking at pilot deviations. We get a report from Jim Tim on accidents and incidences, and we started thinking about pilot deviations as well, and actually got quite concerned about the rate of incidences that we were seeing. So before I get into that, let me get with the agenda here. Let me share my screen so we can get that up. Come on, screen.
What? I'll just use this. I'm just going to use this.
Let's see. And I'm looking for here we are, share screen. All right. All right, you see my screen now?
Yep, we're seeing the IMC meeting.
Excellent, okay. So along with myself, Jim Anderson. Jim is a vice president of Star Aviation, also a Cirrus owner and resident out of Deer Valley, along with myself with my Pacer. Jim has a nice Cirrus that we fly around quite a bit in. What we're going to do tonight, our plan of attack, we're going to review the pilot deviations. Jim's going to cover the runway markings, also from the flight deck videos and taxi simulator that the FAA has come up with. And then I'm going to talk about the brasher as the last thing. I want to put in a plug also for June 7th, the Deer Valley Pilot Controller Forum at 5 o'clock. You can find the link on faasafety.gov. This is your chance to speak with the controllers at Deer Valley. If you're not aware, Deer Valley is the busiest general aviation airport in the galaxy, as Ed Farron, the airport manager, likes to remind everybody. However, he's in danger of losing that because Falcon is quickly coming up on its heels. Lots of activity going on at Falcon. And of course, with all that activity, we're seeing the deviations go up out at Falcon as well. So June 7th, 5 o'clock, you've got your opportunity to talk directly to the controllers at Deer Valley Tower. So if you want that opportunity, we highly encourage it. Joe Santora from the FAA is running the RSAT, which is going to be June 9th from 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock. And that's where the Runway Safety Action Team gets together and they talk about all the problems on the airfield. If you have not attended your airport's RSAT, I publish it in the ASAG meetings. We've gone through Glendale, Goodyear, Prescott, and I think Scottsdale may have had theirs already. I missed one, so, but they're a good opportunity to see where all the deviations, all the construction that's upcoming on the airport, and an opportunity to see things from the airfield managers and ATC's point of view. So I highly encourage attending an RSAT. I also have to put in a plug for our banquet. The other things that we do for ASAG is we hand out the awards. This last year, we had Todd Beer, who was our guest speaker, former Air Force One pilot. The year before that, well, we had one, last year was virtual because of the COVID restrictions, but the year before that, we had it out at ASU Polytechnic at Gateway. And our guest speaker via video was Senator McSally. So she was kind enough to join us for that. During the banquet, we hand out the awards for the CFI of the Year, the FAA Safety Team Member of the Year, the Maintenance Technician of the Year, and we have local awards for Air Traffic Communicator and the Airport of the Year. The nominations for those are due by December, actually they're due November 30th. I need to correct the slide there. But the other nominations will hold off until December. They go to the General Aviation Awards Committee, and they send us back the nominations, and then we select our local winner, and then the local winners get announced at the banquet. They go on and compete at the national level, which is coming up for their awards to be at Oshkosh, and the winners get quite prestigious awards. So we highly encourage, if you've got a mechanic working on your airplane, if you're working in a flight school, put those nominations in for the CFI and the Mechanic of the Year. And the FAST team representatives get selected from the FSDO by Craig Tompkins or Ernie Copeland. So nominations for the Air Traffic Communicator of the Year go into Craig Tompkins, and the same for the Airport Safety Award nomination. And we just got finished awarding that to Tucson International back in March. Jim and I flew down there and presented it to there. We had a good turnout with Lee Unger and Howard Devers and Barbara Harper and Scott Woodworth, and I don't remember who else was in there, but it was great to be with Tucson, and they've done a lot of work to improve the safety around the airport. I also have to put in a plug for the Arizona Flight Training Working Group, which at ASAG, we sponsor their website. We encourage you to get over there and look at it. If you're not familiar with the local area, if you're an instructor, familiarize yourself with the practice areas and the frequencies first. We have pretty much a straight line that goes through Phoenix Sky Harbor. Practice area frequency to the north is 122.75, and to the south is 122.85. Out to the west in the area called Rainbow Valley is 28.925, and then north of I-10 and out further west is 130.625. One of the initiatives we're working at, Lee Unger is working very hard, is we're trying to acquire more frequencies for the south practice area. That area is quite congested. And the other thing that's going on through that south practice area is talking to Mike Gilbreth today at Phoenix TRACON. When Jim and I flew down to Marano last week, we noticed a 737-800 going through at 5,000 feet right through that south practice area. Well, that's the area that VFR, all the practice areas, all the students are heading off to the practice area, and right through the middle of that is commercial traffic going into Gateway from the west. The airline is Avilo. They're flying from Burbank into Gateway now, and there may not be the only ones. Any of the Gateway traffic could be proceeding through that area. So please keep your eyes open. They'll go right through that airspace at 5,000 feet. And that's usually right where a lot of the student training traffic is also going through there. So keep your eyes open for them. If you're not familiar with the training areas and you hear we're doing maneuvers over the green fields, or we're over the volcano, or we're who knows where, All those reporting points are on the AFTW website, and you can download them and put them on as an overlay in ForeFlight. And they actually have a little video on there that shows you how to do that. And then you can turn on your layers in ForeFlight with all those reporting points. They've put them in for the north-south practice area. They also have Prescott in there if you're up working in the Prescott area for all their reporting points. And make sure you check for updates. Just because you've downloaded them once, they do update them periodically. I think they're on revision 9 right now. So make sure you keep those up to date as well. And then if you are interested in doing instrument training, you know that trying to get instrument approaches in the valley is very tough. And the area that gets a lot of use because it's an untowered airport is the Stanfield VOR, and they have an ILS out there, and the holding procedure is called the stack. If you're not familiar with the stack procedures, don't go down there until you go to AFTW and you read the Stanfield VOR procedures. It is strictly a see and void VMC type operation. One aircraft comes in, he establishes the bottom of the stack, which might be at 4,500 feet. The next airplane will call in and say, where's the stack? Well, the stack's at 45, so the next airplane takes 5,000. The stack can go, I've heard it, all the way up to 9,000 feet. And as each aircraft proceeds in on the approach, then the stack moves down 500 feet. It's strictly see and avoid, and instructors and examiners are supposed to be making all the radio calls in the stack. All those procedures are lined out here in AFTW's website. It's downloadable as a PDF, so you can put it on your tablet and have it with you to read as well. Here are the approaches into Casa Grande. They have the ILS, they have the RNAV and the VOR. They used to all be offset a little bit, but about a year ago, they all aligned on top of each other. So very important that you understand the procedures down there. Again, it's all see and avoid, and if Albuquerque Center clears somebody in on an instrument approach on an IFR flight plan, they have priority. It completely blows up the stack. Of course, Albuquerque knows nothing about the stack. This is strictly a procedure among all the flight schools and the training providers within the area. And things also started getting very congested over at Coolidge. And I always think of Coolidge as on my Ox Field, as I was an instructor out at Willie. I know it is Headpin, but it's become a very busy airport as well, with jump operations out there and a lot of training activity with the RNAV approaches. So the AFTW group have decided to put together a stack procedures for there. And again, it's in a PDF format, so you can download it. And one of the things, if you're down there, the course may not coincide with what you'd expect a visual approach in. The VOR approach is actually set off about 30 degrees. So if you hear somebody calling in on the approach and you're in the traffic pattern, keep your eyes out for somebody not where you expect them to be. Right? As always, check NOTAMs, check NOTAMs, check NOTAMs. We have lots of construction going on around the state, and there's a good business to be in right now is airport construction. So stay up to date, check those NOTAMs, and we always encourage the use of checklists. They do save lives. So that is it for my announcements. Let me get into the meat of what we're here to talk about tonight, and that's pilot deviations. All right. Beautiful airplane there at the bottom of an A320. Lots of time flying that. But Arizona, we have a problem. We're starting to see a lot of deviations on the increase. Here's your usual picture of Phoenix airspace with the Bravo. But what you probably haven't seen is how much traffic we have here in a typical day. This is just the transponder 1200 codes, the VFR traffic in the Phoenix area. These slides are about 3 or 4 years old. Of course, the COVID hit the traffic count tremendously, but it's going to start back up on the uptick. So we're going to see this recover to these levels very quickly. So these are the transponders with 1200. Here's the IFR traffic put on top of it. And then if we go back looking at the areas there with the transponders 1200, so you can see it starts to be very congested. Here's a snapshot of out here at Falcon Field, just the VFR traffic out there. And Deer Valley. And you can start to see Luke out there to the west in the pink area. So you lay it all together. This is what a typical day of traffic looks like in the Phoenix area. All right. So is this airplane legally stopped or not? Well, it depends on if he's stopped or if he's been cleared into position and hold. But you can see his nose gear is on one side of the runway markings, but the nose is over the line. So this would be a deviation, and one of the things that we're going to be talking about. Back in 2016, Tina Buskirk did a presentation talking about aviation accidents, incidents, runway incursions, and PDs. And I thought it was interesting to compare where we were in December of 2015 to where we are today. And in December, this was the quarter. She actually gave this presentation, I think, in January, February. But for the first quarter of that year, which again, the government's on a fiscal year, their quarter starts in September, we had 9 runway incursions and 24 pilot deviations. For that quarter, we had 33 in a 3-month period. Where are we today? Well, 73 pilot deviations since December 1st, when Craig Tompkins started giving us the data at ASAG. Let me back up to that. The Class C deviation, so I'll quickly mention that, was 1A10 down at Tucson that went into the Class C. We've had 29% are our IFR deviations, 2 wrong way landing deviations. Our Class D deviations are 10, 14%. Bravo deviations are 12. Traffic pattern accounts for 12% also. I'm sorry, there were 12, 16% in the Class Bravo. Traffic patterns were 9, 12%. And crossing the hold line, a whopping 25%, 1/4 of our deviations are pilots that are failure to abide by the runway markings or the instructions that they're given by the controller. So where do they break out by airports or areas? Falcon, Chandler, and Gateway account for 27% of our deviations. If we throw in Deer Valley, Scottsdale, and Prescott, they account for another 30% of our deviations. Right? Scottsdale really had very few deviations, only 3%. So 18%, and Prescott at 9%, coming up with that 30% for those 3 airports. And then Tucson and Phoenix, only 4% of the deviations. And the Tucson really only had 1 airport surface deviation, failure to abide by the controller instructions. The 1 Phoenix deviation was a reported pedestrian, which when they went out to look for the individual, they couldn't find them. So whether it was a real deviation or not, we'll never know. And 1% out at Gateway was actually quite good. And the 1 deviation at Gateway was, we'll get to it a little bit later, but somebody who cut down through their airspace from the top in the Delta. So airspace deviations account for 39% of the deviations. Actually, the biggest chunk of this are airspace deviations. So we're going to cover deviations a little bit, or airspace a little bit more in depth. And I bring up Carl Hancock. Carl has a YouTube video called Fly with the Guys, and he's done an excellent job of trying to describe airspace. I've only taken a shortcut of this, talking about the Delta and the Bravo, but I encourage you to go back. He talks about Echo, Gulf Airspace, Alpha Airspace, but for tonight's presentation, we're just going to be concerned first with the Delta Airspace.
Airspace, things can get overwhelming really quick. So today, we're going to help you understand airspace using Minecraft, a new perspective on how to look at things coming up. So I said understanding airspace can be overwhelming, mostly because it's given to us like this, in a sectional. It looks complicated with lines, numbers, circles, and different colors all over the place. It's almost like my 5-year-old drew some abstract art. Then the FAA gives us this diagram to understand it. Now everything on the sectional has a meaning, but we're not going in depth on those in this video. Details of the sectional are covered in the legend, but we're only focusing on this portion of it here to tell us what we need to know to find the airspace that it depicts. So our main focus here is going to be on understanding airspace for visual flight rules, or VFR. Understanding it is hard for one big reason. We're looking at it in a complicated two-dimensional image and trying to make sense of it in a three-dimensional world. Digging in, let's look at Deer Valley Airport, my home field. On the sectional, it's depicted by this blue dashed circle, which, according to the legend, tells us that it's in Class D airspace. Then, using the square here, we understand that the airspace extends from the ground and up to, but not including 4,000 feet. Then, in our heads, we have to translate this 2D information into 3D so it makes some sense. So really, the airspace is like a white cylinder with defined circular boundaries and a ceiling. And you know what? I'm a visual learner. Let's make this easy on ourselves and build it in Minecraft. Here in Minecraft, we really get a feel for what it's supposed to be like. You can actually see that the airspace is shaped like a wide cylinder with a defined circular boundary and a ceiling with the airport at the center. With that in mind, Class D airspace is generally from the surface up to 2,500 feet above the airport elevation. It typically extends to 5 miles horizontally and surrounds towered airports. Its actual radius and shape can vary though, depending on the needs of the airport and what surrounds it, which is why sometimes you get Class D airspace that looks like this, where these three airports are trying to eat each other. Flying into Class D airspace, all you need is a two-way radio. To enter, you need to establish two-way communications with the control tower, which means they have to respond to you using your call sign before you enter their airspace. And airspace,
All right, so when does Class D airspace exist? Well, if we go into the chart update manual and the airport facilities directory of the CHUM, we can see that Delta airspace actually exists only when the tower is in operation. And for Chandler, the tower operates from 1300 to 4Z local. So you have to convert that. Remember, we are always 7 hours difference in Arizona. And it says right there, airspace Class D is from 13 to 4Z. Well, if you can't convert that and you're using ForeFlight, they also say the hours are from 6 to 2100. So there's another source that you can use is going into ForeFlight and looking at your info page, looking for the tower, and it tells you the frequency and the time of operation as well. Right. So some of our Class D deviations, I've picked out the highlights. We're not going to go through all of them because, like I said, there were 73 deviations throughout the last 5 months. So here's one: aircraft transition from south to north through the Chandler Class Delta airspace below 3,000 feet MSL, descending to 2,500 feet without contacting the tower. Aircraft landed at Falcon Field, was issued the Brasher. We're going to get into the Brasher. I have a whole presentation on that, what that means. But if you see aircraft issued the Brasher, that's not a good thing for the pilot. Right. Aircraft violated Scottsdale's airspace by entering Class D 5 nautical miles north of Scottsdale at 3,300 feet. Aircraft flew a direct route, exited the Delta 5 nautical miles to the northeast. Aircraft call sign was obtained by using ADSB on their keyboard. So unfortunately, with the double-edged sword, we can see traffic. Well, guess what? FAA can see the traffic as well. So another good reason with your ADS-B transponders, make sure you're complying with the regulations because the ATC can see what you're doing. All right. Another one, aircraft was in the hold above Williams Gateway. This was their one deviation. VFR with P-50. P-50 is Phoenix Raycon. Aircraft was observed departing the hold, descending through Willys airspace without two-way radio communications towards Chandler. No further information. All right, here's a PA something XX. I've sanitized these, so we don't want to incriminate the guilty here. Was observed 5 miles southeast of Chandler and then turned north, transitioned through the east side of the Chandler class Delta at 2,600 feet MSL without establishing two-way radio communication. Route of flight was approximately 2 to 2.5 miles east and northeast of the airport. And then finally, we got a Cessna XX, flew through Falcon's airspace without establishing communication with the tower at 1758 southbound. About 6 minutes later, he flew through Chandler's class Delta airspace at 2,500. So he was a double dipper there without establishing communication. And he earned a brasher out of that one for violating two class Delta airspaces in one day. All right, so if we look at the FAR 91-129 Operation Class D airspace, says each person operating in an aircraft in Class D must meet the following two-way radio communication requirements. Each person must establish two-way radio communication with the ATC facility, including the foreign ones, maybe up in Canada is where they're applying that. But essentially you have to talk to the tower while you're within their airspace. And when you talk to the tower, what they're looking for, you should contact the control tower on the publicized frequency, give their position, altitude, destination, and any request. The important thing here, if the controller responds to your radio call sign, aircraft with your call sign, stand by, you have established radio contact. If he just says, stand by or aircraft calling stand by without specifically recognizing your call sign, your in number, you have not established radio contact. If workload or traffic conditions prevent immediate entry into the Class D, controller will inform the pilot to remain outside the Class Delta airspace until conditions permit. If you're flying into Goodyear these days, that seems to be conditions permit when the tower closes, but they're getting very busy over there. All right, runway incursions and hold line clearances. We're going to go through these, but this is why Jim is going to go through runway markings, because we've had quite a number of incursions caused by pilots not following the instructions. So here's one at Falcon. The Cessna XXX exited 22 right. You can see it in the yellow here. Was told to hold short of 22 left on taxiway Bravo. Aircraft gave a good readback and was told to contact 124.6. Aircraft continued across the runway. Other aircraft taking the runway cleared for takeoff at the same time. Local controller was able to cancel the takeoff clearance for the other aircraft. All right. Let's see. This looks like probably down at Chandler. A BEXX Taxi 2 departed 4 left without ATC authorization. The BEXX taxied via Foxtrot, Alpha, and then Delta to 4 left and took off without contacting ground control, and he departed without contacting the tower for the takeoff clearance. There was no other traffic involved. Here's one for Deer Valley. A PAXX departed 25 left without ATC authorization while 172 was on departure roll. Right up here at the end of 25 left. PAXX called, advised they were ready for departure. Local controller instructed the PAXX to line up and wait for 25 left. The readback was correct. Local controller transmitted a takeoff clearance to the PAXX, but observed he was already on departure roll prior to takeoff clearance being issued and was a beam Charlie 11, which is right about down here at the end of the yellow. And at the time, the 172 was only down here about Charlie 9 to Charlie 8. So well still within the runway. So a loss of runway separation occurred there. So runway incursions and hold line clearances. Deviation reported by Deer Valley when a CXXX did not clear runway 25 left after landing. Local controller observed the Cessna stop after the runway edge line short of the hold short lines. And controller kept telling the pilot to cross the hold lines twice. There was no response from the pilot. The aircraft did not move across the hold short lines. Approaching IFR aircraft was issued a go round. So the runway edge markings, that white line that goes across here, is not where you stop. These are the old markings at Deer Valley. You have to proceed all the way past the runway hold point markings before you're actually clear of the runway. So I've got the diagram for Deer Valley here with the new taxiway. Unfortunately, a lot of the photos that are available on the internet and also with the FAA have not depicted the updates they've done with adding taxiway delta. And a lot of the deviations are being caused by these new displaced runway hold lines. The new hold lines per the regulations are 150 feet from the runway center line, which puts them right out here at the edge of the taxiway. So when you exit the runway, you have to make sure that you're all the way across that runway hold line, which means going onto the taxiway. We actually went out this weekend and got some shots. It was a very quiet weekend. You can see the runway hold line. This is at Charlie 9 or Charlie 10, I believe, is way back from where they used to be. So as you're taxiing down the runway, you can see the runway taxi line here, the runway edge line. Exiting, the old markings are here, but take yourself all the way past the runway hold line, which is onto the taxiway before you call ground. All right. On to traffic patterns. Aircraft was 22 left, assigned runway heading. After the local controller aircraft switched the aircraft to the other controller, and before he checked in, aircraft turned right. Aircraft turn conflicted with another aircraft in the right closed pattern. ATC observed the conflict, issued other aircraft a traffic alert with a left turn. Aircraft read back and executed the other aircraft turn to the left. Aircraft turn to the left caused the aircraft to merge within 1/10 of a mile and 200 feet vertical. So not only did he did not follow the controller's instructions, he took the other airplane's instructions as his own, not listening to the controller. Another one, aircraft on departure was instructed to fly straight ahead out till leaving 3,000 feet, then north turn was approved. There was a good readback and the pilot turned just off the departure end. No other aircraft were affected. And that's a common thread on that, is that there's a good readback, and then for some whatever reason, the pilot fails to do what he was instructed to do. So is that an expectation bias? Probably. Not really listening to what the controller's instructions are. All right, aircraft cut off the traffic it was supposed to follow. The local controller told aircraft to turn right and go around. Aircraft continued through the finals, then turn left towards traffic in the north pattern. And the final one here, Phoenix. Deviation report by Deer Valley when a BE-35 without approval turned their base leg approximately 3 miles from the airport, causing a conflict. So I don't know if the problem here was he was out, he extended his downwind and further than he should have. Your turn to base, unless you're instructed otherwise, should be somewhere between a half to a mile if you're at that 45-degree point from your touchdown point. So going out 3 miles in some airports can almost take you outside the Delta airspace. All right, and the last one I have is called the Cone of Confusion Award. Goes to a pilot or instructor and pilot that were out at Deer Valley. They checked inbound 8 nautical miles west of Deer Valley at 5:15 Zulu, which is about 10:15 at night. South Tower issued a pattern entry instructions, but did not receive a response. Tower attempted to establish two-way radio communication without success. Airplane entered the Deer Valley Class Delta without authorization. But wait, it gets better, all right? They used the common traffic advisory frequency and proceeded inbound. However, the tower was still open and speaking with multiple aircraft. Tower continued to reach out without success, issued numerous light gun signals in an attempt to make the contact with our CE, our Cessna XXX. You can kind of guess what type of airplane that is. Anyway, Tower called the flight school 3 times without an answer. Tower issued light gun signals on every single downwind base final that the airplane flew. They cleared each pass without a response. Tower checked their radio with an Angel 6 helicopter operating off the south terminal pads. Angel 6 reported Tower loud and clear. Also attempted to reach the Cessna without a response. Tower tried making contact via secondary transmitter without success. Attempted to reach him on guard 121.5 without success. Tower attempted to reach when they were transmitting out in the northwest practice area as well on a frequency without a response. They continued to use the common traffic advisory frequency while they were in the pattern, and they did 5 touch and goes in the pattern there before they departed the pattern, went back out to the practice area to the northwest. So that definitely deserves the conehead of the night award for deviations. So light gun signals, that brings up an interesting question. How many of you remember the light gun signals? Well, I certainly don't, so that's why I have a card down in on my knee board with them on there, or if you're using ForeFlight, keep it as a document in your document section or a picture that you can readily get to, because when you need the light gun signals, you're going to be scrambling to remember what they are. So we're going to go through a little quiz here. So here you are at Chandler on the ground, and you see this. What does it mean? I don't expect all 40 of you to respond, so I'll go ahead and give you the answer. All right, if you see a steady red, it means stop. So our next one, you see a steady green. Steady green, you're cleared for takeoff. All right. Now you see a flashing green. Flashing green means you're cleared for taxi. Our next one, you see a flashing red. Flashing red means taxi clear of the runway in use. Right, so you would probably see this after given another light gun signal that we'll get to in a minute. Maybe you just landed, so you're seeing that flashing red. So taxi clear of the runway in use. All right. And now you see this, flashing green, flashing red. What that means is exercise extreme caution. And the last one for our on the ground is if you saw flashing white, which you'll only see on the ground. This is not an air signal. So flashing white means return to your starting point on the airport. All right, so let's go to the signals in the air. You're flying into the Deer Valley area and you see a steady red. What that means, steady red, give way to other aircraft and continue circling. What if it started flashing on you? All right, the flashing red means airport's unsafe, don't land. How about a steady green? This might be, you see the cleared to land, and after that, you see the cleared to exit the runway light signal. So steady green means cleared to land. And flashing green, Return to landing, followed by a steady green at the appropriate time. Right. Our last one, flashing green red. Again, same thing it meant on the ground, exercise extreme caution. So there's your light gun signals. Couple wrong surface landings that we had, I believe there were 2 of them. Aircraft landed 7 right without ATC authorization. The aircraft called the local controller north, inbound from the northeast. Local controller instructed the aircraft to enter left traffic, 7 left. Readback was correct. The common theme here is that they get correct feedback, readback, and then the pilot doesn't do what he's instructed to do. Issued a sequence to several aircraft in the pattern, cleared them to land 7 left. Pilot read back the instructions correctly, landed on 7 right instead of the left. Called ground control exiting taxiway Charlie 5. Ground control issued the Brasher warning. No other conflict traffic was involved. So the deviation, rarely do we get to see a cause, but the deviation was due to complacency and lack of situation awareness. Out of Chandler, pilot deviation reported by Chandler when aircraft cleared to land 22 right and landed on 22 left. All right, so let's take a look real quick at Chandler. Here's 22 left, and here's 22 right. So you can see which airport stands out, is more prominent, is that 22 left. Same problem if you're looking at it from the other direction. 4 left stands out much more than 4 right. So when you're working in airports with multiple runways, really be cognizant, pay attention of what runway you get to land on. Right? For some reason, you would think Gateway, with those 3 big runways that are out there, would be a problem, but they've had 0 wrong runway landings. Here's a picture of 30 left, 30 center, 30 left, and 30 right over here. The instrument approach goes into 30 center for Gateway. Look in the opposite direction, 12 left, 12 center, 12 right. We'll continue our little tour around the valley since we're doing this. We got Falcon Field here, and this is the taxiway Bravo. Airplanes landing 4 left, 4 right, and a lot of times they're getting over to the school or the FBOs on this side of the airport. That's where the hold lines become a factor to hold short 4 right, and aircrafts fail to do that. Right, here's looking at it the opposite direction. Both runways are pretty prominent, so there isn't much of opportunities to confuse the runways other than maybe mixing up your left and right. All right, we'll go up to Scottsdale real quick. Here's runway 3. And looking at it from the opposite direction, runway 21 over the golf course. Right, the only hazard might be confusing a taxiway with a runway, but it's pretty well marked for instrument approaches. If you are doing a circling approach coming in from the west, the runway is pretty hard to pick up among all the construction now, all the buildup within the Scottsdale Airpark. So, Goodyear, again, nice long runway, very accommodating. If you've got a lot of work to do, I encourage you to go over to Goodyear. Their traffic count is down quite a bit because Lufthansa ATCA flight school is pretty well shut down because of the COVID restrictions in Europe. So they're not seeing a lot of students. So it's a good opportunity if you want to get lots of patterns to go over to Goodyear and do your touch and goes. All right, so here's runway 21, looking towards the southwest at Goodyear. And right next to it, right up there off to the Luke airspace as well, is Glendale runway 1, and looking in the opposite direction is runway 19. One of the restrictions, not restrictions, but be aware that the wind coming out in the afternoon, you get quite a bit of turbulence rolling over the hangars here on the west side of Glendale. Right, and our infamous Deer Valley Airport. One of the things that Deer Valley has done is you notice the difference in the gravel on either side. The green gravel is actually fading a little bit. It was more green when they first put it in, but the green is on the north side, and it separates 7 left, 2-5 right from the brownish reddish rock on 2-5 left, 7 right. But we still have airplanes landing on the wrong runway. Here's what it looks 7 right, 7 left looks like. And some other shots I have for you. Looking in the downwind, we're on a left downwind for 7 left. You can see the industrial buildings right here, and you can see 7 right is the more prominent runway. All right. As we're about to turn base, 7 left kind of disappears. And if you look off the nose, which runway is more prominent in this picture? 7 right shows up very well. 7 left, even with the different marking around the runway, is pretty hard to pick up. And it's tucked behind the buildings right here. It becomes a little bit more prominent as you get closer in. Right. So that's enough about the airports. Let's look at airspace deviations. They fall into 4 categories. Pilot failed to maintain assigned altitude, failed to fly assigned route, NORDO, and pilot failed to fly correct procedures. So I know this is the VMC IMC club. A lot of these deviations fall into the IMC portion of that. So we're gonna hit those. Altitude deviation, a BAXX, 6,200 feet. Albuquerque Center cleared them to cross the Stanfield VOR at or above 5,000 feet. Cleared for the VOR runway 5 approach into Casa Grande at 2138, 4 miles prior to the Stanfield VOR. Center observed the airplane below 5,000 feet. Remember, he was told to maintain 5. Did not comply with the ATC crossing restriction and crossed Stanfield VOR at 4,500 feet. The Albuquerque Center controller issued a brasher. Pilot called the facility, stated he thought he crossed at 5,000, which is disputed by the radar data. All right. Here's another one. Aircraft was issued a descent to 7,000 feet by ATC. This is Phoenix Approach. Aircraft descended to 6,300 feet. What you see on the right side here is the min vectoring map for Phoenix Approach. Way up here is San Francisco Peaks. It's at 14.7, and we're down here in this little quadrant that's 6,700 feet. Descended to 6,300 feet before ATC reassigned 7,000. Aircraft descended below the 7,000 feet, resulted in loss of separation with the terrain, obstacles, and this was just up north of the Carefree area. So remember that the aim, the min vectoring altitudes in each sector provides 1,000 feet above the highest obstacles in non-mountainous areas and 2,000 feet above it in the highest obstacles in designated mountainous areas. So while the controller thought there was a loss of separation with terrain, he probably wasn't real close to hitting the terrain, but we did have an airplane several years ago, a training airplane went up to practice radio intercepts from Transpac, and they ended up hitting that same area up there at night. So the terrain rises rapidly from the valley floor up to the north. Here's another IFR. A PAXS been cleared from Imperial. Here's the Imperial VOR. Jet 18 to Gila Bend. That's the whole area I've got highlighted in yellow there. And then direct to Safford. At 3:10, LA Center cleared the airplane direct to the Bard VOR, which is right here, right by Yuma. A fix that was on Jet 18. Clearance did not remove the rest of the routing. At 3:37 Zulu, Albuquerque Center noticed that the airplane was at 250, was off course, and turned the aircraft to the north, but not before he violated the 3 nautical mile buffer right here along restricted area 2301 to the east, which was active up to 80,000 feet. This is the Barry Goldwater range down here. So this thing is active all the time with air to air, air to ground, all sorts of live ordnance flying around down there. So it's not an area you want to be going through. So when questioned by ATC, the pilot thought he'd been cleared, barred, direct destination. Controller did not issue a brasher on this, but this could have been a very serious incident if he'd been in the restricted area. Right. So remember, cleared direct to a fix does not remove the remainder of your routing. All right, and this is one that could have been very, very serious. Out of Falcon, airplane was departed on the Sacat 3 from 22 left. All right, so he's taking off up here on 22 left. A Southwest airplane was coming into Sky Harbor, descending on a left downwind for Phoenix for 25 left. After departure, our airplane proceeded to fly the Sacat 3 initially, but unexpectedly turned to the west to what appeared a 270 heading. Controller recognized this, immediately turned the airplane southbound and issued traffic. After speaking with the pilot on the phone, obviously there was a brasher issued for this, advised that he had the Sacat 3 procedure programmed for a runway 4 right departure. He was taken off the opposite direction instead of 22 left. Pilot's intentions were to make a complete 360 turn to rejoin the departure until the controller had stopped him. All right, so what's the lesson here? Obviously, make sure you know what the runway is, but program everything on the ground and make sure it's correct before you ever take off. All right, Nordo. Up in Albuquerque Center, ATC cleared the aircraft to contact Albuquerque Center on another frequency. Aircraft did not respond to that call nor any subsequent attempts made by ATC. The aircraft remained out of contact until 1722. This started at 1618, so an hour and 4 minutes, when the aircraft finally called Albuquerque Center, and they issued a brasher for being out of radio contact up near Show Low. So, a couple questions. An hour and 4 minutes out of radio contact. How long should you go without, if you don't hear anything on the radio? And the question I also have is, do you monitor 121.5? So how long do you let radio silence go if you don't hear anything? And the answer is approximately 1 minute. Normally, you're going to hear a lot of chatter on the radio, so it's infrequent unless you're flying the all-nighters to Pittsburgh. Then you can go minutes without hearing anybody. And you know it's not Nordo, but it's just middle of the night. Nobody else is on the frequency. But this was not the middle of the night, right? 17Z is 10 o'clock in the morning. So where would you find center frequencies? If you misset your radios, you fat fingered them. Well, they're on the flow chart. You can look there. You try those frequencies. They were somewhere up in the Show Low area, so you could pull up the approach plate for Show Low, look at center frequency, and there it is right there, Albuquerque Center on 132.9. Right, a lot of modern glass cockpits also have the center frequencies right there. Right? So if you get lost, you can start looking through your frequencies on your glass cockpit display. A lot of good information, a lot of capability with these new glass cockpits. So what are your Nordo procedures? Well, I remind you, we're not going to go through the Avenue F and the MEA, all that stuff that's in the AIM. But the most important thing, if you do have radio failures, make sure you squawk that 7600 so they know that you are radio failure and not something else nefarious going on. All right. And this brings up a good question. Do you carry a handheld radio in case you did have radio failure? And if you are monitoring 121.5, a lot of times the only other airplanes that are monitoring 121.5 are the airliners, which are required to monitor it. They have that second radio. And I've been asked to try and make contact with an airplane that's been off frequency on guard. So try listening up on 121.5 if you're truly out of radio contact. All right, so back to Carl. And Carl's gonna finish up talking to us about Class Bravo airspace.
Let's move on to the most complicated airspace of all, Class B airspace. And back to the sectional. Now, I know this greater Phoenix airspace looks complicated, and it's because there's a lot of stuff going on here. But let's focus on just the Class B airspace, depicted by these solid blue lines growing outward from the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. Just like Class C airspace, Class B has shelves, but it's not limited to just 2 tiers. There's as many as needed to support the airport, its traffic, and what surrounds it. Each shelf can have a different shape and size, but they all work outward and upward away from the airport. Each shelf has a base and a ceiling, with the top typically at 10,000 feet MSL. All right, it's time to see this in Minecraft. So this took a long time to make, and I actually commissioned my 13-year-old son to get it done. It's not perfectly scaled, but it gives a great representation of the Class B airspace in Phoenix, Arizona. Now you can really see how the shelves move up and out away from the airport, and you can see how ridiculously huge it is. This allows aircraft to fly underneath the shelves without having to contact Phoenix Tower. In fact, the Phoenix Class B airspace has 8 towered airports underneath it to operate independently, as shown here in this more Phoenix-like desert-esque landscape. Guys, literally, I just threw sand everywhere. Going back to its shape, from the inside of the Class B airspace, it looks more like a funnel to the airport, and that's because it is. The fingers and shapes are designed to provide safe passage for larger air traffic all the way to the airport, which is why it's so big. To fly in Class B airspace, you need to have a 2-way radio and a transponder with altitude reporting capability, again, typically called a Mode C transponder. You also have to have that ADS-B that we were talking about earlier. Entering Class B airspace is different too and requires more than just establishing communications. You have to have ATC clearance and be cleared into the Bravo prior to entry. If you don't hear these words, don't enter the airspace. So far.
All right, so quite a few deviations on Class Bravo airspace here. So aircraft entered the Phoenix Class B without authorization, no loss of separation. This was over in the Chandler area. Mesa at Falcon, pilot deviation reported by tower when the PAXX entered the Class Bravo airspace without authorization. Another PAXX departed Deer Valley requesting the west transition with flight following to Gateway. Controller tagged up the aircraft, proceeded to issue the instructions for the transition. After a radar handoff to the PIMA controller, which means the south side of Sky Harbor, controller in the aircraft appeared to be clear of the Phoenix Class Bravo airspace south of the airport. The controller terminated services. The pilot then resumed navigation, turning eastbound to Gateway, and may have re-entered the Class Bravo airspace. We'll take a look at that in the map here in a minute. That is, if you're not very cognizant of where the Class Bravo is off to the east, you can easily cut the corner and be back in Class Bravo without authorization. And then this airplane was southbound through the Class Bravo on the transition. Upon leaving the Bravo, services were terminated, and the controller said, leaving Phoenix Bravo. Phraseology was given, and the airplane then climbed back into the Bravo, into the face of an IFR northbound aircraft en route to Scottsdale. Traffic was immediately issued, and the IFR aircraft responded to the resolution advisory. This is their TCAS, traffic collision and avoidance system, going off. Veering into the final box and climbing into the face of another southbound VFR aircraft on the transition. When the situation was resolved, the controller asked the original airplane what was reason for re-entering the Bravo. Pilot responded he was distracted. Well, he got a brasher for being distracted. And another one departed southbound out of Falcon, flew over Chandler and back to Falcon, violated the Class Bravo airspace at 4,500 feet. The Bravo section entered without clearance was from 4,000 to 9,000 feet. Talked to the supervisor. The pilot got to talk to the supervisor and understood they had violated the Bravo airspace. I suspect probably a student on that one. So here's our Phoenix area terminal chart. Most of you are probably flying along with some sort of iPad now or ForeFlight, something of that nature. When was the last time you actually looked at the index and the accompanying data that's all out here on the terminal? Well, our maps now are all seamless. When was the last time you really took a good look at all the other stuff that's available out here in the margins. And if you had a paper chart, when was the last time you actually looked at the back side of the terminal area chart? You can download this terminal area chart and put it in your document section of ForeFlight and have it available. And if you look at this version of the Class Bravo, it greatly simplifies what you're looking at. All right. So here's an expanded view. And the neat thing about looking at this is they actually depict the VFR corridor that you could fly through without having to enter the Class Bravo, and you'd be avoiding the Class Delta airspaces. There actually is a small tunnel that you can go through without having to go through the Bravo or Deltas. Right, so what do we need again to enter the Class Bravo airspace? You have to have an operable two-way radio capable of communicating with ATC. You can't take off within the Class Bravo unless you hold a private pilot certificate or a recreational pilot certificate and you've met the requirements, or a sport pilot certificate. And the thing with the sport pilot in 61-325 is they have to have the endorsements for landing or going through Bravo airspace. So make sure if you're a sport pilot, you have those instructor endorsements in your logbook. And the same thing if you're a student pilot, you have to meet the endorsement requirements for that as well. And then this is one that got airlines in trouble all the time. Unless authorized by ATC, if you're operating a large turbine aircraft powered primary airport shall operate at or above the designated floors while within the lateral confines of the Class Bravo. Where this gets airline people in trouble is they're cleared the visual and they descend out of the Bravo airspace on their way to going into the airport. And you can end up, we had a turbulence upset about 3-4 years ago with an airplane that was doing instrument work, and a 757 UPS airplane cleared the visual, cut the corner, and ended up 57s are some of the worst for wake turbulence, and ended up upsetting the airplane beyond almost to 90 degrees in their upset on their approach there. Other thing, you have to have an operable VOR or TACAN receiver for IFR ops, and you have to have a transponder with automatic altitude reporting. In addition to that, Carl mentioned this quickly in there, now you have to have an ADS-B transponder to operate in controlled airspace. So that's the C and the Delta. You can get a one-time waiver for flight through there, and you go to the, if you just put in ADAPT, that's the ADS-B pre-flight tool in the search bar, and it'll take you to the FAA's website. And this ADAPT has a form that you can fill out. You stick it in, the time that you have to go, what your route of flight is, and they'll send you back an email approving that your one-time flight with a 2-hour window for flight into that controlled airspace. It's really quite simple, and it works very well. Right. Make sure that you operating within the Phoenix Class Bravo. Make sure that VFR flights should contact the appropriate control facility on the specified frequencies. And when you do, make sure you tell them in reference to what geographic fixes are on the chart. And if you're departing a primary airport, make sure you talk to clearance delivery. If you were down at Sky Harbor and you were planning to go VFR, contact clearance delivery before you ever take off to get that Class Bravo clearance. So here's our airspace out at Chandler Falcon. And if you get to fly the transition, like the one airplane, the controller's gonna give you clearance into the Bravo. He's gonna tell you to fly either the west or east transition. If he gives you the east transition, what you do is you fly over the east end of the runways, or west transition, you fly over the west end of the runways, and they're gonna assign you an altitude, either 5,000, 5,500, or 6,000. It depends on how much traffic they got going through there. The important things, as Carl said in the video, is you have to hear cleared through Bravo airspace, and then he's going to give you another clearance through the transition. What happened to the one violation that we had, I suspect they came down through here, and he was at 4,500, left the Bravo. Notice the Bravo goes to 5,000 here, but through this corner on his way to Gateway, it goes back to 4,000. Or he may have cut the corner here where it's still down to the surface. So a good idea is put these VFR transition points in here and fly to these points. They will keep you outside the deltas until you can make contact, and they'll also keep you outside of this other range. What you do have to worry about is make sure that you don't hit the floor of the Class Bravo going out here towards Mesquite High School. All right, the other thing is coming up. If you have TFRs on your map, and you start looking at it this time of year, it looks like we got a case of the measles going on because of all the fire TFRs that are popping up. This was just this last weekend, particularly with dry storms that start to precede the monsoon, we get lightning strikes, we can get a lot of TFRs for fires. So Jim and I were flying up to Sedona a couple weeks ago. Nice day, beautiful, calm, clear. And if you look down here at the clock, you can see this is about 8:37 in the morning. We're on our way up to Sedona. Well, Jim had the presence of mind to make sure he checked ForeFlight on the way back, and sure enough, a TFR had popped up on the way back. And you notice this is about 3.5 hours later. This TFR has popped up. It wasn't there when we left. Here's our track, and you can see there's an airplane right in the middle of the TFR at 2,100 feet below our altitude. And sure enough, if you looked at the altitudes for the TFR, they go from surface to 8,500 feet. Well, we're at 8,000 feet here. This airplane is squarely in the middle of the TFR. When we landed, part of our role as FAST team representatives is counseling. So this airplane followed us into Deer Valley, and we went over and talked to him. He was totally flummoxed that he'd violated a TFR. You could see he'd had a great day flying up with his wife, and to be shown the evidence that he'd violated a TFR that he knew nothing about, because he said he had TFRs turned on his ForeFlight, but I don't think he really did, nor did he really check ahead. I gave him the phone number for the control center here. This was the Maggie fire, 928-777-5700, and he actually called the director the following day, and I called her and talked to her. And if you didn't have this pulled up on ForeFlight, you would never know there was a TFR, because there was no smoke, there were no other airplanes in the area. But she said, yes, indeed, it was a real TFR. And fortunately for our pilot here, they had knocked it down very quickly. And I don't know if you can see it. I was driving up to Prescott. Right here in Black Canyon City, on either side of the pipeline goes up, you see this pinkish fire retardant trail on either side of the pipeline. So she said, yes, indeed, there'd been a real fire. They had put it out, got it knocked down, and the air attack assets had returned to base. So as far as they were concerned, there was no violation that particular day. I also talked to her about, well, if Phoenix Approach sees that there's an airplane up there in the TFR, could they violate the pilot? And she said, that's a very real possibility, but Phoenix Approach would have to recognize the TFR being in place and that the airplane had gone through it. So just because the fire coordinator didn't violate the pilot doesn't mean he might not have gotten violated, but not likely. All right, so that's my end of my presentation on all the violations and TFRs and stuff that's been going on out in the East Valley and around the state. So I'm going to turn the rest of this over to Jim, and we'll get back And I'll give a quick briefing at the end on the brasher.
Real quick, Gary, we have just one comment. I'll throw that in real quick if you want before Jim gets started.
Sure, Alex.
This is a question just verbatim. What are the typical pilot excuses for plowing into Class D airspace without communicating? So is there something in common?
I think Craig Tompkins could probably answer that a little bit better because he gets to talk to the pilots after they've made those deviations, if Craig is on. But I suspect a lot of it is pilot unawareness that they were in the Delta.
It sounds great. All right, let's move on. That was the only question.
Okay. Well, thanks again, everybody, for taking the time. I'm Jim Anderson. Cary's already introduced me. I work with Cary a lot on the FAA safety team and also on the ASAG, Aviation Safety Advisory Group. And we really enjoy doing what we're doing. And it's a pleasure to spend some time with you folks this evening. So, you know, with regards to signs and markings around the airport, well, this is something we learned back when we, got our tickets, or maybe we upgraded. Certainly if you're a flight instructor, you're teaching this stuff all the time. But for a lot of us, this is something that just kind of falls off the scope. You go back and review it when you have to, when you can, and signs and markings around an airport are quite important. This is kind of a retro look back at Phoenix Sky Harbor. This actual taxiway intersection, Foxtrot 7, doesn't even exist anymore. Was eliminated. The building's been eliminated. Southwest doesn't fly the short, 737s anymore, and Terminal 3 has been changed. So there's been a lot of activity. So just because you know an airport and you've been in there time and time again, a lot of construction going on. All this talk about infrastructure, is certainly going to have an impact on that as well. And so it's really important for us as users of the national airspace system to be as competent as we possibly can when it comes to surface movement. So signs and markings are what we're going to talk about a little bit this evening. Now, the good news is that as far as the signs and markings, this is pretty much all you need to know. I'm not saying that this is all encompassing, but if you can learn what these signs and markings are about and what they're telling you, it's going to get you around the airport pretty safely. The FAA has come out with a little handout, it's a clipboard kind of thing. You can download it on this website, faa.gov/go/runway safety, or you can zip it with your QR reader. And it's a really handy thing to have. If you're going to go to a more complex airport, maybe something you want to brush up on. If you're going to go to some place that has one runway, one taxiway, okay, maybe not as important, but you definitely don't want to be sitting there at Long Beach at Taxiway Golf wondering what all these signs mean if you haven't brushed up on it for a while. Of course, you always have the option of progressive taxi, but hey, it's our responsibility to know these signs. It's not our responsibility to understand these signs, and it's also our responsibility to comply with them, more importantly, and avoid pilot deviations, which is an impact on safety. It's not just about the brasher, it's about, hey, this is how we're all going to stay safe out there. So, quick review, airport signs, movement area. If we see something that's white on red, it's mandatory. Some sort of action is required. If you see a red sign, you don't know what it is, and you're cruising along, hey, take a moment, call up ground, and ask them what's going on with the sign or whatever. Chances are you may not be in the right place at the right time or whatever the case may be, but that's a mandatory. There's some sort of action required, and it's usually stop or hold short. Black on yellow, it's an informational directional sign. It tells you something, and the yellow and black that's where you're at. So the black on yellow is going to tell you, hey, go here for the FBO, go here for fuel, go here for whatever you're looking for. And the yellow and black, that's where you're at. There's also painted markings in the movement area. The runways are always white. Taxiways are always yellow. Don't take off with the yellow center line. And if any of you have been to Henderson, Nevada, there's a couple of signs on, I think it's taxiway alpha as you come out of the ramp area. It says, don't take off on the taxiway. Well, that seems pretty obvious, but for some reason, some people have used that taxiway as a runway. And so they put those signs out there to just warn you what's going on. Maybe a little bit too much time in Vegas, who knows? But anyway, that runway is aligned perfectly with the taxiway, and that taxiway is actually wider on some of the runways I've had the privilege of flying out of. And of course, the surface painted signs match the sign colors. And so if you see a red box on a taxiway, that is some sort of mandatory thing. That means you got to do something. That means you got to stop. So if we take a look at that, here we go. We have runway 1634. We have the runway boundary markings, and you have some red here, red on white. There's a mandatory sign. That means you've got to do something. That typically means you've got to stop here unless you have ATC clearance to cross past. And amazingly, this little area right here is where a majority of the pilot deviations come from. And again, here's just a speed dating overview of some of the signs and some of the markings that we have. Again, anything with red on white, it's mandatory, and it's also followed by that position holding marking, an ILS holding area. Again, that's a mandatory thing. And again, ATC will tell you if you have to hold there. The runway hold position sign also coupled with a taxiway. And here we have a complex environment where we have intersecting runways and taxiways. And it's telling you where to go on taxiway Charlie for runway 1432 left, 1836, and arrows used when there's more than one runway present. Here's one that I don't think we have too many of these in the valley. At least I haven't seen any. But you're on taxiway Foxtrot, and you're approaching runway 14 left on the approach end. And again, that's going to be some sort of mandatory area depending on what it's marked up as. And again, just another example of some mandatory instruction signs. A horizontal line through it. That's not an area that you want to take an airplane into. That is not appropriate for taxi. So again, a mandatory sign. More examples of informational signs. You're trying to find runway 105. It's this way to the ramp. We've got an ILS hold area, boundary signs, runway 14 is this way, taxiway Bravo is that way to the left. All good. Now we get into a little bit more meat of things when it comes to direction signs. So here we have an intersection. If you take a look at this depiction where it shows taxiway Bravo continues off to your right at probably the 1 to 2 o'clock position. Taxiway Foxtrot is behind you to your right and also ahead of you to your left. And then also in the distance, we have taxiway Foxtrot with a mandatory 14 left approach sign. And so here, taking a look at the example, you're on taxiway Alpha, the yellow on black, that's where you're at. So we know that. And then just, use these things to try and orientate yourself. Again, it's not a sin to call a ground on Echo, and I'm not quite sure that I'm on Echo. Can you, give me a progressive? They're happy to do that. They're happy to do that in lieu of you making a guess and end up having a pilot deviation or being in the wrong place at the right time. Location signs, the yellow on black. So we have runway 22 and taxiway Bravo here. And also one thing that mentions some discussion is taxiing in general on movement versus non-movement area before you proceed onto the taxiway from a ramp area, the non-movement or the non-movement area, you need ATC clearance. And so be aware of these dashed lines with the solid line when you're in an air traffic control of a Class Delta airport and the tower is in operation. This is some signage that you might see to alert you that you're going to be in an area, a movement area, you're approaching a movement area. And again, it's not just alerting pilots, but vehicles and some sort of ATC clearance, communication, or authorization. The airport movement area is kind of a thing. It's really established between the airport and an ATC with a letter of authority or letter of agreement. and all those things kind of go on behind the scenes, but it's a positive control area. And separation services are provided by ATC, so it's very important. You're taxiing around. Let's be cognizant of these areas, and we don't want to go wandering around out there, even if it's just a little bit. It could interfere. It's their responsibility. It could interfere with other airport operations, and so we just want to be compliant as possible. And here's just a quick overview of what this is all about, the apron non-movement area. So if you want to go from your tie-down space over to the wash rack or over to the fuel farm, and as long as that's in the non-movement area, you're fine. You can do that. You don't need to contact ATC. But once you cross that solid line, or you want to go on the other side of that solid line, you have to be in contact with ATC. You have to have authorization. And then, of course, the runway holding markings. We don't ever want to cross those without affirmative clearance to cross those solid lines. Very important. And if there's a doubt, give ATC a shout out. Don't ever guess. We never want to be in that position. Here's an example of a guy who just missed that hold short marking and slammed on the brakes, didn't quite make it. But again, this defines the boundaries of the runway safety area. We have to respect it. And as Cary mentioned earlier, a lot of the pilot deviations, 75% of pilot deviations result from a failure to comply with this marking. Expectation bias, not recognizing the signage, things of this nature. That's why our SAT goes around and makes sure that these things are clearly marked, the signage is up to speed, there's not weeds blocking things and whatnot. So everybody's trying to do their part, and it's up to us as airport operators to do our part as well. And just a quick visual. Here's we want to hold short. If you're landing and you're clearing the runway, we want to dash across those dash lines. He didn't quite make it. He needs to be all the way across, but I ran out of screen, so sorry. But I think you get the idea. And again, after landing, we have an example here of Falcon Field. And this is where a lot of pilot deviations happen, where somebody's landing on 4 right and they're trying to get over to the northwest side. So advised by the tower, you land and you clear the runway and you get across and you hold short, you hold your position until you have that clearance. And typically that clearance is going to be hold short of the runway at a certain intersection. But it's your responsibility to clear, contact ground as soon as you possibly can, and respect those runway holding markings. Here's where runway location signs become really, really handy. I've been out to Albuquerque a number of times, and there's kind of that cone of confusion if you're on coming out from the general aviation ramp and you're taxiing. I think it's out on Gulf, and typically they want the GA guys not using runway 8. They keep that clear for air carrier ops. And so what they'll do is they'll switch you at the last minute to runway 12. And so it's super easy. It's kind of similar to this representation here, that you get onto the runway and you're not quite sure, is this 8, is this 12, especially if you're coming from this area. Obviously 8's the big wide runway, but it's nice to have these runway location signs that you can verify. Also, another trick is to go ahead and once you know your runway assignment, dial that in on your heading bug if you have one on your directional gyro. And that way you can double check the magnetic alignment along with your runway assignment and make sure that you're all on board and doing the right thing. Remember, black square, you're there. And here's just another example of that. Again, associated with a taxiway location sign. Now, direction signs. So let's talk about that for a second. Remember the yellow sign, yellow array points the way. And so, we're coming up on, we're on taxiway alpha, the yellow and black, that's where you're at. And we're coming up on echo somewhere up here, left and right. You're on taxiway Lima. Kilo is going to be to our left. And we're coming up on Bravo 1. So this would be an example of a runway exit sign. So if tower says, hey, you're cleared to land, try and exit Bravo 1, you're looking for Bravo 1, there you go, it's off to your left. So since Cary introduced a quiz, we'll have a quick quiz here because this is the meat and potatoes of the presentation. Which way is the runway? And I'm not going to require you to shout out or anything. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. But in this particular example, if you guess the runway is to your left, you are absolutely correct. Also, to recognize that you're approaching a runway is, the airport marking signs, the taxiway and runway holding sign. Looks something like that. Now, one of the things that has been done in recent years, and not all airports have this, is they've enhanced the centerline marking when you're approaching a holding position location. So before, here's the existing center line, and what they've done is they put these dashed lines 150 feet before you get to that holding position. And that's to alert you as the airport operator, whether you're driving a vehicle or operating an aircraft, that, hey, you've got a mandatory area and you need to comply with it, and so heads up. So look for that enhanced center line. Now, the option that they had before they invented the enhanced center line was they were going to put in a toll booth and require you to chuck a couple quarters in before you cross the runway holding position, but that's actually been abandoned for now. We'll see, but hopefully they won't implement that. That would be terrible. So let's do all part to recognize and respect the mandatory signs. Here's a really nice one. Oh, my internet connection's unstable. That's great. Hopefully you can all hear me, but here's just another example. These things you might see from time to time at airports, and it's the runway guard lights. And it's also commonly referred to as the wigwag lights. So anytime you see the wigwags, again, that's a mandatory area and you need to be cognizant of it. It's something you need to do. You need a clearance to cross that guy. And here's just another look. Okay, so runway safety. There is some new things that the Runway Safety Action Team, the Runway Safety Team has put together. It's a series of videos. It's called From the Flight Deck. And what they've done is a really nice job. They put together some videos of high activity airports, and especially airports that have had a lot of pilot deviations on the surface environment. They put together some videos that are very informative. It's not just Phoenix, it goes throughout the country. So if you're going to go to, say, Wichita, and you're going to go fly out there and you're curious about, hey, is there a good video, a good overview out there? You can come here, and it's on the FAA.gov website, not FAAsafety.gov. And if you click on airports, runway safety, and you come down here to From the Flight Deck, here's where you're going to find all the videos. There's an interactive map, so you can look and pick the airports that you want to see. And they really did a nice job on producing these videos. So what I'd like to do right now is just run a quick example of the flight deck for Falcon Field. Falcon Field is where we have an awful lot of pilot deviations. It's competing with Deer Valley to be the galaxy's busiest airport. And it's right here in our backyard. So let's just take a few minutes and check this out.
Centurion 39er Quebec, fly straight out, runway 48, clear for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff, runway 48, fly straight out, 39 Quebec.
Each airport in the national airspace system has unique and distinct characteristics, which can sometimes lead pilots to use the wrong surface in taxi, takeoff, or landing operations. Let's take a look at some of these tricky areas from the flight deck.
North American 3246 Golf, Dock, Star, right traffic, runway 48. Right traffic, 46.
Falcon Field is a medium-sized, primarily general and business aviation airport. It is located approximately 14 miles east of Phoenix Sky Harbor. This location makes it convenient for GA and corporate traffic trying to avoid the congestion at the larger airport. A narrow corridor of airspace exists above the Falcon Class Delta airspace and below the Class Bravo airspace for Sky Harbor, providing a means for VFR air traffic to transition through the area without the need to contact ATC. This corridor can be very busy, so pilots are reminded to maintain increased situational awareness while arriving or departing Falcon Field. The configuration consists of 2 parallel runways with staggered thresholds numbered 4 right, 2 left, and 4 left, 2 right. The complex taxiway system provides access to the hangar complexes located on the north and south side of the field. As with most airports with parallel runways with staggered thresholds, Falcon Field is susceptible to wrong runway landings even with the correct readback. Pilots are reminded that expectation bias, expecting one runway and being assigned the other, and visual misidentification, seeing the larger, more prominent runway first, can have severe consequences. Assigned runway changes, for example, moving from right to left runway, are not unusual given controller workload and traffic balancing requirements. In addition to parallel runways, there's also a parallel taxiway that has been confused with runway 4 right, 22 left. While the tower is in operation, the runway end identifier lights are utilized. This is meant to help pilots correctly identify the runway amongst other surfaces.
Well, I think you get the idea. Looks like I'm having some internet problems. And so we'll go ahead and just move on from here. But I do encourage you to check out from the flight deck, check out the videos for the airports that you're frequently using. It has a lot of good information there. One of the other things I wanted to bring to your attention tonight is there is a new runway safety pilot simulator that the FAA has put together. And you can find this simulator on www.runwaysafetysimulator.com. And it's just a little flight simulator that it'll give you some scenarios and ask you to give some different responses. And so I wanted to just kind of run this and demo it for you. For somebody who's been flying for a long time, okay, this is probably pretty basic stuff, but if you're just getting in flying or you haven't been flying for a while and you need to brush up on some of your arrival and taxiway procedures, this is a really good one. So let's check it out.
Safety relies not only on the training and skill set of a pilot, but also on their ability to maintain a proactive mindset when preparing for landing or taxiing. A proactive mindset is key in maintaining situational awareness in the air and on the ground. There are a number of elements to consider as you prepare to land, such as conducting a robust checklist and using effective communication with air traffic control. And don't forget, a thorough understanding of phraseology, hotspots, markings, signage, and lighting all lead to surface safety. In the following scenario, you are returning from a cross-country flight. Get ready to land. You are on a visual approach to runway 28 left.
Tower, November 123 is with you on a visual approach to runway 28 left.
November 123, runway 28 left, cleared to land. Wind 270 at 8.
November 123, cleared to land, runway 28 left. Copy the wind.
As you approach the airport, ensure you are lined up with the correct surface.
So they allow you to look at the airport diagram, check it out. All right, you got a good situational awareness, and now you go back to the cockpit. You've got to point out 28 left there. A lot of surface clutter, pretty confusing. And then you go ahead and make your decision. Pick the wrong one.
November 123, go around. You appear to be in line with the taxiway.
November 123, go around.
The simulator will give you another chance if you click the try again. And there
You picked the correct surface. Remember, when identifying your landing surface, use all available resources to ensure the correct runway. These resources can include visual cues, such as terminals, hangars, and taxiways. You can also gather visual cues from VFR charting products, such as...
So I think you guys get the idea. It's kind of a fun little interactive simulator, and it's a good way to brush up on your airport procedure. They've got a lot of different scenarios, and you can pick from any one of them. Doesn't require a super fast internet connection, but anyway. Hey, that concludes my part. Hope you maybe picked up a few things, learned a few things, but anyway, the whole point of this was just to kind of brush up on some runway markings and signage and just keep you guys on your toes. So head out there, stay safe, and be well. Cary, back to you to wrap it up with the brush.
All right, thanks, Jim. While you were talking, I got a response back from Craig Tompkins, and the question was, what do pilots say when they violate the Class Delta? And his response was exactly what I said. Most say they weren't aware it was there. So kind of sad with all the technology that we have now in the cockpit, which can bring up another set of problems with their heads down too much. So let me see if I can get back to Jim. You need to stop sharing your screen so I can share for the brasher.
Yeah, for some reason, I might lose the meeting, but I'm going to close this and that should give you control. Seems to be having some internet. I'm usually not the one with the internet problems, so sorry about this, Cary.
The trials and tribulations that we've had via COVID, so. And while Jim's doing that, he had one slide there that shows an approach hold. And those of you that fly out at Gateway, taxiway Alpha has an end around that turns into Papa at the end of runway 30 right. And, or 30 left, 12 right to get over to the center runway. And there's a lot of, they've had violations in the past where airplanes were told to hold short of Papa, and there is a hold line very much like the approach lines out there at Gateway that you need to be cognizant there on that south end. So it looks like I may be back here. So let me hit share. And let's see, it looks like I'm sharing now. So you should see, what is a brasher report? Can I get a thumbs up from somebody there? You're seeing the brasher. Thank you, Kelly, for that. All right, so what is a brasher report? We started looking at all these pilot deviations and I heard brasher was filed, brasher was reported. I go, what is a brasher report? So I started looking into what is the brasher. And what you don't want to hear is this: November 123 Alpha Bravo, we have a number for you to call when you land. Advise when you're ready to copy. November 123 Alpha Bravo, possible pilot deviation, advise you contact, and then you're going to get a phone number, a facility name, and you know that it has not been a good day for you. All right. So here's some deviations that we've seen in the past. I didn't bring them up tonight, but ATC cleared contact Albuquerque Center. Aircraft did not respond. Subsequent attempts, that's another Nordo situation, brasher was issued. Next one, cleared the VOR approach up at Winslow. The guy flew around lots of missed altitudes, and Albuquerque Center gave a brasher at that one. Down there, missed airway routing. He said he was expected, he flew a routing that he was expected to get, and rather than what was actually assigned, so Albuquerque assigned a brasher. Pilot deviation down here, flight of 4 F-16 spilled out of the MOA. They got a brasher issued to them. And then another one on the departure out of Sky Harbor. Pilot didn't fly the routing as expected, and he got a brasher assigned to him. So lots of examples of brashers there. So what the brasher comes out of is the air traffic organizational policy. This is their order 7210.6320 or 632 Alpha. And it lays out exactly what a brasher is. And the controller has what's called mandatory occurrence reports, MORs. And there's hundreds of them, well, not hundreds, but there's dozens of them that we're going to go through here. So in an occurrence involving air traffic services or technical operation services for which the collection of associated safety-related data and conditions is mandatory. So the controller is required to fill out an MOR for all the things that are in Appendix A. Not all of those are going to result in a brasher. So when the controller determines the pilot actions affect the safety of the operation, then the controller has to fill out the MRI, notify the flight crew, workload permitting, in accordance with the order, and using the phraseology that I just read to you, possible pilot deviation, advise you contact the facility at this phone number. All right. And the other responsibilities is workload permitting, the pilot will be notified using the following phraseology, which is the brasher warning. Aircraft identification, possible pilot deviation, advise you contact at this phone number. When workload or circumstances do not permit the immediate notification of the pilot, alternative action should be attempted to make sure the pilot is made aware. So we saw some of these where they violated the Bravo. Falcon Field was the one that actually issued the Bravo. So suggestions include making the notification on the next frequency that the pilot is assigned, or possibly contacting the owner of the aircraft as soon as possible. You might actually get a phone call the next day. Whatever alternatives are decided upon, the individuals involved will use their best judgment, and alternative action should be in the mandatory occurrence report. So what's in Appendix A? So let's start looking at some of these. Airborne loss of separation. Any suspected loss of radar separation involving IFR aircraft, other than as a result of compression on final approach. Compression is where airplanes are, don't fly the assigned airspeeds on the final approach, or there's just too many of them at one time. So that starts to be compression at the final approach fix. Loss of separation on final will be closely monitored using electronic loss of separation detection, other things. So, but what they're talking about there is en route separation. Any suspected loss of separation involving VFR aircraft in class Bravo or C airspace, or the terminal radar service area, or practice VFR approaches. Any suspected loss of separation involving formation flights. Right? One of those brashers was the F-16 spilling out of a MOA. Any suspected loss of separation involving non-radar standards. And we're seeing a lot of unmanned aircraft systems, UASs now, also will generate a brasher. I was talking to Ed Farron, and they found a little red drone out in the middle of the airfield. So if a pilot reports an air traffic control becomes aware of a UAS operation conducted in an unsafe or hazardous manner, the controller has to fill out an MRR for that. A lot of airports, the Class Delta airspaces are getting infringed by drone activity now as well. And one of the things we've been working with ASAG, it's in the MRRs here as well, but we've been working with Phoenix PD, Officer Clark, to track laser illuminations as well as UAS operations around the valley here, working with not just the Phoenix PD, but Phoenix DP or Mesa DP, and we're working with Scott Woodworth down in Tucson with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, getting reports of those laser strikes. Hopefully we'll get a reduction in those as well. Airport surface loss of separation. So any ground surveillance alert, this is like a ground radar that they have on the airport movement area between two aircraft. Any ground surveillance alert between an aircraft and a vehicle. Any suspected loss of runway airport surface separation between two airplanes. Separation between an aircraft and a vehicle, or suspected loss of surface between an aircraft and a pedestrian. That was one of the deviations that we had down at Sky Harbor where they couldn't find the deviation. The terrain obstruction, any suspected loss of separation between an IFR aircraft and terrain or obstacles, right below the min vectoring altitude. That's why that was a deviation or minimum IFR separation. Right. Operation of VFR aircraft in proximity to terrain or obstacle, the employee providing air traffic services affected the safety of flight. So these you may be getting flight following, or the controller sees you getting close to terrain, he can issue a safety alert or a control action out there. All right. So a safety alert is when the aircraft, you're aware that the position, altitude, and your judgment places unsafe. Remember, your judgment is the controller's point of view here. proximity to terrain, obstructions, other aircraft. Once the pilot informs you action being taken to resolve the situation, you may discontinue the issuance of further alerts. All right. And the issuance of safety alert is a first priority. Once the controller observes and recognizes the situation of unsafe proximity to terrain, obstacles, or other airplanes, conditions such as workload, traffic volume, the quality, limitations of radar systems, availability, lead time to react to factors, and determine whether it's reasonable for the controller to observe and recognize situation. So they're not always going to get you a safety alert. And Jim's got a great presentation, and a good friend that he was flying with many times in formation clinics was a retired controller up in Las Vegas in the Class Bravo airspace and hit terrain just to the north of North Las Vegas. And he was aware of the terrain. Controllers certainly were aware of it, but this terrain is the only place in the country that penetrates Class Bravo airspace. So they may not always have the opportunity to give you a safety alert. So it's always your responsibility, right? And let me skip through for the next one. Control actions, IFR traffic which could be affected. Overdue or unreported aircraft must be restricted or suspended unless radar separation is used. Facility responsible must restrict or suspend IFR traffic for a period of 30 minutes following the applicable time listed. So what this is if an airplane becomes overdue, they have to suspend all IFR operation along that area. So until the time at which appropriate approach clearance was delivered to the pilot, the EFC time that was delivered to the pilot, the arrival time over a nav aid, the current estimate, either the control facility or the pilots, whatever is later, at the nav aid or fixed, and the release time that was issued. So if any of these things, the clearance void times, hold for release, release times, overdue, they start putting in these traffic restrictions, which I'll hit real quickly here. So they have to turn on the lights at the airport, at non-tower or non-flight service stations, request the airport management, light up all the runway lights for at least 30 minutes before the ETA of the unreported aircraft has been located, or for 30 minutes after its fuel supply is estimated to be exhausted. In the terminal, operate runway lights, approach lights, all other required airport lighting for at least 30 minutes until the aircraft has been located or its fuel supply has been exhausted. And after that 30-minute traffic suspension period has expired, resume normal air traffic control, or pilots of other aircraft concur. This concurrence must be maintained for a period of 30 minutes after the suspension period has expired. So who knew that they would suspend traffic going into an airport for a period of 30 minutes for an overdue airplane? I thought that's pretty cool. And if there's two-way radio failure or loss with an aircraft, we saw several Nordos here. When an IFR aircraft experienced two-way radio communication failure, air traffic control is based on anticipated actions. Pilot procedures, recommended practices are set forth in the AIM, so we got to know what those are. The FARs and pertinent military regulations. I don't think we have any active military pilots here, but maybe we do. Should the pilot of the aircraft equipped with a coded radar beacon transponder experience loss of two-way radio communication, he's expected to put in 7,600. Right? And try and reestablish communications any ways possible. Limited to emergency frequencies, broadcast through the nav aids with the voice capability, use flight service, aeronautical radio, incorporate Air Inc. Certainly you can use other airplanes as well. And Air Inc., just for those that aren't familiar with it, that's a communication network that the airlines are required to have so that pilots are always in contact with the dispatcher. And broadcast clearances through any other available means, including the voice feature. Some UHF airplanes have VHF, so use GUARD 121.5 and try and attempt it. If you can try and ask the airplane with the transponder, make turns. If you're acknowledging this turn, make a 30-degree left or reset your transponder or press ident is a good way to do that. And the main thing about that is what we don't want is to think that the airplane is being hijacked. So Airspace control, route separation not involving loss of separation, any instance which an aircraft enters airspace other than the expected or intended altitude reading or airspeed, or without a point out or handoff. So these are your class deltas, class bravos, class Charlie violations. It's an MRR. Any instance where an aircraft operates at an altitude routing or airspeed that the employee providing air traffic determines affects the safety of flight operations. These occurrences normally result in ATC issuing a safety alert or a control action. All non-loss traffic alert collision avoidance system TCAS resolutions and spillouts must be reported under this MRR. So if an airline or a business jet responds to an RA, that results in a MRR from the controller's point of view. And they're going to ask sometimes, what's the reason for your RA? They're going to see it because they have it on radar. If they go into warning areas, MOAs, ATC assigned airspace without coordination and authorization, that's an MRR. Things around the airport, presence of aircraft, vehicle, or pedestrian, any movement area, runway safety area not intended by ATC, aircraft unexpectedly lands or departs or attempts to land or depart on a runway or surface, such as landing on the wrong taxiway instead of the runway, an incident in which aircraft lands or departs or flies an unrestricted low approach to a closed runway or a portion thereof. Any go-around initiated by either flight crew or ATC involving turbojet aircraft within a half mile of the arrival threshold, not involving practice approaches. So I've had to go around several times. San Francisco is a good one. LA, you go around and the controller goes, state the reason for your go-around. Well, because American didn't clear the runway. Or another one is, we didn't get landing clearance. The controller got busy, didn't give us landing clearance.
Hey, I resemble that remark.
Yeah. So you know it happens, all right. And any incident in which any part of the aircraft is crossed over the runway, hold short line, and the controller cancels takeoff clearance, flight crew aborts the takeoff. Any instance in which an aircraft unintentionally maneuvers off the runway or taxiway, if you go to the RSATs, they're going to talk about runway excursions. That is also a reason for an MRR. And any improper, unexpected presence of a vehicle or aircraft inside the ILS protected area when they tell you to hold short of the protected area. We're not going to talk about the oceanic environment because most of us are never going to see that. And then if there's an emergency, you have to fill out an MRR for that. If it's declared by ATC or the pilots. The other thing is the dispatcher, you didn't know this for the airlines, can also declare an emergency for any type of medical emergency, equipment malfunctions, crew injuries or passenger injuries, fuel quantity, pilot disorientation, VFR pilot trapped in or on top of the clouds. This happens a lot up in the San Francisco Bay Area. The Fresno FISDO was the FAST team director was telling us they have a huge problem with this up in the Bay Area. I'm sure San Diego, similar problems. Laser light illumination, right? And hijack, bomb threat, bird strikes, anything else. If an expression of concern by an external entity to include a flight crew to management on the radio concerning proximity of another airplane, either airborne or on the surface, including near mid-airs, an upset, pitch roll attributed to wake turbulence, right? And the AIM has definitions of there. That requires an MRR. And this is the form that they have to fill out. So those are all the MRRs that a controller has to report on. So what is this Brasher thing? Well, in 1987, the administrator versus Brasher, this came out of a court ruling, and Captain Brasher was in command of a Republic MD 80, I think it was an 88 at the time, from Chicago up to Minneapolis, flight 77. Captain Brasher happened to be a line check airman flying with a brand new FO. It was the second day of the trip for this first officer with 9 hours in the DC-9. FO was flying, he failed to level off at flight level 200, busting the altitude by as much as 700 feet. 6 months later, in August, Captain Brasher received a notification of a violation and subsequent investigation. In that time, he'd flown 151 more flights and didn't recall the incident flight at all. In his appeal to the NTSB, he claimed in spite of recently FAA policy to do so, he was not notified of the violation in a timely manner. So he took it to the appellate judge, and the NTSB agreed a violation occurred, but because of the length of the delay, no sanction should be placed against it. And over here on this side, what the judge says is, I can understand administrative bureaucratic delays. One office contacting or having to process papers before they get in touch with another office, but I see no reason why quality assurance office can be in a position to contact the controller almost immediately, but ignore the pilot until he's flown another 151 missions and doesn't have the foggiest idea what went on with that particular flight. In view of those circumstances, as I say, 5 days would ordinarily be appropriate, but in this case, I think there should be no sanction. I find the violation, but I don't think any sanction should be appropriate under the circumstances of this particular case. So after due consideration of all the evidence, I find that the administrator has met his burden of proof and has proven by a preponderance of evidence, reliable and probative and credible evidence that a flight violation of regulations occurred, specifically in the FAR. But for the circumstances I've already alluded, I find that no sanction would be appropriate under all these circumstances. I find the safety and air commerce or air transportation in the public interest does not require affirmation of the administrator's order other than to find that a violation did occur. These proceedings are concluded. So with that, the judge said, FAA, if you don't apply in a timely manner, you can take sanctions against the pilot. So what do you do if you get a brasher warning? Well, I recommend, and these are recommendations only, file a NASA report immediately. And according to the website JD Price CFI, there's no need to make that telephone call immediately. Take time to think about it. Call an aviation attorney before you make that phone call to ATC. If you're a member of AOPA and the legal services, I would definitely call them. Your call will almost certainly be recorded when you call that number. And the AIM specifies that such calls are recorded. And since you have the AIM memorized, legally that is sufficient notice. So there is no tone, there's no beep, there's no announcement. A lot of times when you call on the recorded line, they say you are on the recorded line, but there's no requirement to do that. You may ask if the call is being recorded, speak on an unrecorded line instead, and the request may or may not be honored. Anything you say can be used as admission in court against you. So it sounds like old dragnet. Be polite, don't be prolific. In other words, you don't need to have diarrhea of the mouth when speaking. It's discourteous not to return a call, but nothing says you have to spill your guts. So you can say something like, I was asked to call after I landed. Can you tell me why? I'd rather not say anything about it right now. I'd like an opportunity to hear the tapes before I say anything. And that's part of the pilot's Bill of Rights. And you don't have to wait to hear the tapes. There's a website called liveatc.net. You can go on there and they have archived transmissions from just about every place in the world with ATC, ground, clearance, tower communications. You put in there the time, the Zulu time and date, and the location that you were at, and you can hear most of those transmissions for yourself. Other things we recommend is use the WINGS program. Shows you're a conscientious pilot. Less than 1% of the pilots involved in WINGS are having violations. So for most of the people tonight, kudos to you because you're not the ones that are having these violations. Gather as much information as you can about your flight through FlightAware, liveatc.net, ForeFlight, GoPro. Show contrition. When you talk to the inspector, don't joke or make light of the situation. Be proactive, get additional training with the CFI. What's going to happen if it gets to the brasher, it's going to go down to the FSDO, and the FSDO is going to assign it to an aviation safety inspector. And it's going to come down here to an event. It can either be an informal event or it can go into a formal letter of investigation, and it's going to get broken down into no violation occurred. Somebody like Craig Tompkins or Ernie are going to look at it and they say, well, maybe we need to have compliance action here, or it may result in a 709 recheck ride or administrative action or proposed certificate action. The FAA doesn't want to get over here to any of these things. They prefer to go to this compliant action, right? And that's where somebody like myself or Jim are going to get called. If there's been a deviation and Craig says, well, the inspector agrees that what he needs is a couple lessons on airspace. So somebody like Jim and I are going to go out and we're going to fly with the person around the area, go through airspace, go through all the different things that we've gone through tonight, talking about possible deviations. And that's how they would prefer to do this. It's not going down here into this legal action all the way through an administrative law judge to a full NTSB appeal to the appeals courts. That's going to get very expensive for everybody. So try and handle it at the lowest level. And that was it used to be the compliance philosophy. It's now become the compliance program. And how all that works is another presentation that we're going to have for the future. I think actually Craig Tompkins gave one on this at an EA chapter meeting just last month. So that concludes our most of our presentation. What I found interesting was back in 2015 when Tina Busker gave this, talking about all the mitigation strategies that we're going to do to reduce pilot deviations. We've been doing all of these things. But what we really need hasn't changed that much. So we're not going to be able to change deviations and accidents without your involvement. It's not just us talking to all of you. You guys need to get out with all the pilots that you fly and make sure they're aware of these type of situations. And you can be representatives for safety for all of us. So that's what I encourage you to do. If you see something, speak up. Don't allow people, and particularly if you're out flying on that Sunday morning pancake run to Coolidge and you see lots of people out there, hey, do you know about the Coolidge stack procedures? Or no, I didn't know them. Tell them about AFTW and all the things that are out there. So lots of resources as well. All right, with that, we're just about 5 minutes over. So any questions, I'll hand it back to Alex and you can close the evening.
All righty, if anybody does have any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can present those now. One thing just to know that speaking about wings, it was brought up a couple of times. This does qualify for wings credit. It qualifies for 2 wings credits because we have 2 presenters and it was 2 hours long. I took attendance during the presentations, but sometimes I miss somebody. So if you don't get credit by say Sunday, then respond to the email and get a hold of me and I'll get it corrected. So if anybody has questions, go ahead.
Paul Rowley's still on. I see Paul had some great comments about knowing your pilot bill of rights. And that's excellent advice.
Kelly, did you get your questions answered? I saw you had a couple of in the chat.
Cary, can you answer about the airline that's now making approaches from the west into Gateway that's flying below the Class B?
Yeah, Kelly, I was speaking with one of the controllers, Mike Gilbreth, about that today. The airline is a Velo. That's that new airline from Burbank. And
Right.
they're actually well outside the Class Bravo airspace. They're within the Mode C Vail, but they're not underflying any of the Class Bravo airspace. So that's why they're out there towards that south practice area, south of Firebird Lake, transitioning along it'd be right along the north edge of the Santan Mountains going over to Gateway.
Okay, as the Bravo goes almost, but not quite to Stanfield.
No, the Bravo.
Or is that okay? I'm confusing with the Mode C.
The Vail might go that far out. It goes 30 nautical miles, but the Bravo doesn't go that far out.
Okay.
Kelly, what would be the problem with them flying under the Class Bravo?
Being in VFR traffic that they may or may not see.
Well, everybody's got to have Everybody's got to have ADSB if you're in Class Bravo or anywhere near it, underneath it.
Not necessarily if they don't have electrical power.
Yeah, and remember, a turbine powered airplane has to fly within the Class Bravo airspace, and that's why the Class Bravos are there. They're transitions into the instrument approaches for the main feeder airport, which in here is Sky Harbor. So that's why airlines are expected to remain within the Class Bravo. The problem becomes if they're clear to visual, then they have dropped out of the floor of the Class Bravo on occasion, and that's in violation of FAR 91 as well. So in this case with the Avelo, they're way out there down to the south. They're not impacting any of the Class Bravo airspace, so they don't have to fly with it.
Okay, thank you.
But isn't it true that as long as they maintain under 200 knots underneath the Class Bravo, they're fine?
That is still a requirement, but the FAR says that they're supposed to remain within the constraints of the Class Bravo. Now, there are occasions where the controller may vector airplanes underneath the Class Bravo on purpose. And that's another area where the crews have gotten caught because they went out of the bottom of the Class Bravo as being vectored and they weren't under 200 knots.
Right, I understand. We saw it in Las Vegas a lot of times where people were, at first the controllers were vectoring them below the Class Bravo, and they can't do that. That's not cricket. But
They're supposed
200 knots.
They can do it if they tell you that you're going to exit the Bravo.
Right.
But they're not on a routine.
You don't have to take it, but you're right. But as long as they're under 200 knots, there really isn't nothing that I know of. Maybe I'm mistaken.
There is an FAR 91 section that says that turbine airplanes are supposed to remain within the confines of the Class Bravo. Now, and they made a point of talking to us because at United, crews were being cleared the visual all the time, and they were cutting out of the bottom of the Bravo.
Right.
ATC,
I understand.
ATC chose not to issue brochures because it was happening all the time, but technically they could. Other questions?
Your presentation was just too thorough.
That's what? I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that Cary and Jim's presentation was just so thorough.
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah, it was very, very good.
Right. I recommend go view the video for Gateway as well, because there's a lot of unique taxi configuration changes out there at Gateway to be aware of. So it's great stuff. So Jim, you got anything else?
Nothing else, sir. It's been a pleasure, and hope to see you guys in the air.
Right.
Alex, thanks for having us, and let's see if we can cut down on all these deviations.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I will send out an email. I'll try to include some of the links that were in the chat and in the presentation to the runway simulators and whatnot. And again, if you didn't get wings credit by say Sunday or so, then please reach out to me. As far as additional meetings, usually we take a break in July and August, but because of COVID, I think Joe might do it. 1 or 2 IMC meetings, and then we're going to reevaluate in September if the airport will let us have more than 10 or 11 people about in-person meetings. But like tonight, we had 67, which would have been more than the room would have held anyway. So we are talking about maybe streaming the in-person meetings so more people can attend, or if you just can't make it in that day. So, but that's something for the future, and we'll look into it. If nobody has anything else, I'm going to go ahead and end it. I did try recording it, so if I can make that work, I'll put out a link so you can rewatch it. There's a ton of great information, and this was like an entire private pilot and instrument course all combined. Anyone else?
This is Paul here. That was 91-117. Carry on that rule you were looking at. 91-117.
Thank you, Paul.
You bet.
Good to see you, Cary.
Hey, Wendy, good to see you too. All right, everybody.